Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Batman Begins from 2005. And this is a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. And this movie selection was selected by Sinram, believe it or not. Having a big Sinram week. You should check out his channel. It's pretty cool. When we talk about Batman Begins, what seems to be the kind of argument that most people have is what this did for superhero cinema. And certainly that's true to an extent, but I think its bigger cinematic legacy is the career of Christopher Nolan. Now, before Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan was known. He was mostly known as being like the Memento guy, and that was sort of it. You know, Insomnia happened, but like that wasn't really a thing. So before Batman Begins, there had never really been an $100 million big budget Christopher Nolan big accessible blockbuster movie. And this was the very first one. And it established him. You get a blockbuster of quality, you get the pacing that he's always been known for, and bringing that into a time when, you know, most blockbusters were known for Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay. Here comes Christopher Nolan with Batman Begins. And it kind of resets really what a blockbuster can be when he comes in. You can have these kind of artier, weirder blockbusters make $100 million. There certainly had been ones before. They didn't have a name that was actually marketable like he is currently. Now, saying that, and that this is his first one, it doesn't really feel like The Dark Knight and all his preceding kind of bigger blockbuster films. I don't think The Prestige is really... I mean, it's a good movie. It just doesn't really count in terms of a blockbuster. No offense to The Prestige. I don't think that's what it's going for. This almost feels like it's an assignment, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He doesn't feel like the director that you would see in The Dark Knight and Inception and stuff. He feels like he's trying to play the game almost. But I think he learns how to play the game to his advantage. This is a typical superhero origin thing, and by this time we'd all seen the origin of Batman many times. None of this is new information. And we've seen, you know, his parents get shot and, you know, the pearls and all this nonsense. He understands he has to do that. And superhero movies of this time were almost more known for origin stories than anything else. And we knew the kind of format and the genre that this was in. Now, what Christopher Nolan did as a director is he sort of looked at how to do that. He looked at the genre clearly and kind of emphasized some things and de-emphasized other things. Particularly how Batman Begins is mainly a movie about Batman. It's not about Batman and a villain. There are villains in this, but it's different because if you look at particularly the first Spider-Man movie, Green Goblin becomes a villain at the same time that Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man. In Batman Begins, Ra's al Ghul and Scarecrow are already established. They're already fully formed people. I mean, they're not, but you know what I mean. And Bruce Wayne and Batman are not. You see Bruce Wayne become Batman, so your emphasis is actually on him. Now, this movie has a lot going on, as most origin stories in superhero films of this era really did. But I think, again, what Nolan showed as a director, he was able to make that work probably better and more streamlined and pacing-wise, not feel as stagnated as those films did. Now, one of the interesting things he does borrow from Richard Donner is this feels probably more episodic than any of his other films, and especially any of his Batman films. I think in some cases they all sort of do. They're kind of episodic in story structure, but he kind of like doesn't edit them that way, even though if you think of the screenplay, like there's 45 minutes of this film, and then when he gets on the plane, it's almost like that's episode 2 or whatever. And he took that predominantly from Richard Donner's Superman or Superman the movie, where that understood that how are comics told? Well, they're told in issues or episodes, and you sort of have to adhere to that structure. In some ways, this tries to try to be more serious and darker than like what people imagine a comic book to be. But in other ways, Christopher Nolan sort of understood, well, if you're going to tell a comic book story, you have to sort of adhere to what these stories basically are. What I find really interesting about this one, actually, when I'm watching Batman Begins this time, is he almost went in and played with the episodic nature of it, but didn't make it feel episodic. As busy as this film is, as many characters as it's introducing, and having the city of Chicago be Gotham, which was a great choice, actually. I think that works because Chicago is a city that actually, you could tell it's city planning, and New York's just a city that they just kept building stuff on. He definitely doesn't let all those complications, and this film is very complicated. There's a lot going on, and to fully explain everything going on, it would take you 20 years and all that stuff. It wouldn't take you 20 years. It doesn't feel very simple, but it moves in a very digestible pace. And when I was watching, like when I started this, I was like, ugh, another superhero origin thing. I don't know. It's been a while since I really sat down with it. I was surprised at how well this thing flowed. And that's something that I think Christopher Nolan understood, is like, I can be weird and have all these big dramatic elements and use older storytelling elements. I just have to have it move for that audience. And he didn't understand that more than he did here. I semi-wonder in certain things, particularly the levity in this, if the studio like made him do that, because this seems way funnier and a little more blockbustery in the traditional sense than he's ever been after this. Part of me wonders if, you know, he let David S. Goyer do more of that stuff, who co-wrote this film with him, or he made the studio do certain things. He didn't have as much control then, so I'm not trying to like say, you know, he's less of an artist or something like that. I actually sort of like this version of Nolan, because we only really got it for one movie, because then he made The Dark Knight, and that doesn't feel that way at all. They're clearly going to let this guy go. So it's like kind of like a weird period for him, because, you know, Memento was very acclaimed. They weren't going to let this novice director have like total final cut, maybe to a certain extent, but it feels like they made it kind of a little more fun. And it seems like he was trying to get this to work very much, while still being like explaining the ethos of Bruce Wayne and everything, and still being Christopher Nolan. It feels more of a compromise than we've ever really seen from him, and I actually sort of like that. I think that's actually really, really cool from him, kind of like a different directed film from him. And we get like, you know, his first big action kind of car chase sequence, which is really great. Sometimes I do feel like this film doesn't play as well on like TV, or gets underappreciated, because I've worked at places where it's on all the time and you catch a minute of it. And this is a film that, it's sort of interesting, is as much as I talk about how it's episodic, it really works. Anytime I've sat down and watched it from beginning to end, I really like it. And anytime I catch 5 minutes of it, I'm like, oh, this movie, whatever. It just like doesn't flow the same way. Whereas Dark Knight, I actually think if you can catch 15 minutes and get sucked in. This one I don't feel that way as much. Maybe that might be a personal taste thing, but it feels like when you watch the whole thing, you really get wrapped up into everything that's going on. And I think because there's so many kind of things driving it, just catching 5 minutes is a little more difficult. But I don't know if any movie's really made to be, you know, seen with 15 minutes in the middle of it and you have to understand it or something. Might be an unfair criticism, but I have known people who kind of disregard it because they've seen it on TV or something like that. And I think the commercial breaks actually kind of ruin this movie, not to be, you know, a Christopher Nolan about it or anything. These are probably the first Batman films that are very much crime movies. They're crime stories. I think Roger Ebert said that in one of his reviews of The Dark Knight, that he was like, this is one of the best crime movies I've seen. And he plays it almost how, like, I know Michael Mann's a big influence on him. He plays it in sort of a Michael Mann-ish way, but this one, what I think struck people is it's very much more of a crime movie than a superhero film. And Nolan was smart about sort of doing that, because that establishes, like, Batman does crime stories basically, and you kind of have to present that in the right way, and he got the tone of who that character was. I really like Christian Bale in this, and I think his casting is inspired, because Christian Bale's sort of, you know, he is a movie star, but I don't think he's like a movie star kind of, not that any other Batmans were mugging, well, I guess sort of the Schumacher stuff, but Bale plays it more like as committed as he is to any of his roles, and he plays it more like an actor than anyone really has before. People say that this brought a darkness to Batman or superhero films. I don't really agree with that too much. I think there's certain films that are obviously influenced by this film, but like that was like Tim Burton's Batman did that also, you know, this whole idea of like bringing darkness. I don't think it changed the cinematic landscape. I think it's something Frank Miller introduced, and we keep seeing change and change and change. But I think what he did do is this is almost maybe the first prestige superhero film. Because you look at, like, you have Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Liam Neeson pre-Taken, who is not known for these kind of things pre-Taken. You have all these actors who don't normally do this kind of thing, and this is before the MCU could buy all these people up. It was a different way to cast these sort of things. In a lot of ways, this is maybe more of the precursor to later the Joaquin Phoenix Joker film than anything, than that kind of idea. I get when people say it's a serious superhero film, it's one that like looked like it was a lot more important. It looked like it was different. And I think as Nolan brought that gravitas to it, but he understood how to tell that story in a way that didn't make it feel like a superhero film. And in a lot of ways, that's what I think Marvel would do with the MCU, is they would take on these very... If you look at what the MCU did with like Winter Soldier, they take a political drama or a 70s political thing or like an In Line of Fire and combine it with Captain America. Same with a lot of their stuff are kind of genre combinations, and he definitely did that through this. I do quite like Christian Bale, particularly in this one. Morgan Freeman is a great touch. I almost wish Morgan Freeman was in it more. This is like I think the first we get of Michael Caine in a Christopher Nolan film. This is a real Nolan introduction. I will say I'm not the biggest fan of Katie Holmes, and I never really have been, and I especially then never got what everyone liked about her. Most of it I kept thinking like, man, I wish Maggie Gyllenhaal was in this. And it's not just because I prefer Maggie Gyllenhaal as an actress and a person and stuff, but I think it's also because I think she's a lot more compelling, and I actually sort of believe that she would be this DA, and I don't know if I necessarily fully believe Katie Holmes, but I eventually get used to her at a certain point. I just sort of accept it, but I know, she was more of the bigger name choice or whatever. But and I like Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow. I sort of also have always liked about Batman Begins is they don't give you Joker first. They let Batman breathe, and then they bring in the rogues galleries and stuff, and you get that establishment with the audience. Another thing he introduces is caring about, if you're going to sell 3 more of these films, you got to get people to care about this guy right away. And that's something Casino Royale did. That's something that the MCU did. That's a lot of franchises did, starting with this movie. Now, obviously Donner's Superman did that also, and we should probably give that film a lot more props. But I think in the modern sense, Batman Begins showed like, oh, you care about Batman? Well, he's going to come back, but he's going to come back and there's another character, another cooler villain to fight, and it's darker and crazier this time. And that like established kind of like a lot of what we would get from those certain things. But it was because Nolan showed, restraint in some things, understanding what he had to do and present with this kind of a movie. And it's also like more of a straighter thing from him in all these Batman films. Most of his other films have to do with time and editing and like time displacement. You think of Inception, Dunkirk, Interstellar, presumably Tenet, I haven't seen yet, obviously. These are told in very straight ahead fashions, and it's almost like weird to go back to this period where he's not the biggest director in the world. I like Batman Begins as a Batman film. I think it is probably one of the best Batman films ever made. I think Nolan established that he knew the character very well. I never liked when they changed Gotham to New York in Dark Knight Rises. I always liked Gotham in Chicago. I thought that was an inspired choice, actually, even at the time, because they always do like, is Gotham New Jersey, New York kind of nonsense, and I much rather like the Chicago thing felt right to me. The whole idea of fear, the philosophy of this, the idea of fear, that like he needs to conquer his fear, he needs to bring fear to other people, and that Scarecrow is also doing this theory. He has this beautiful theme going throughout it that sort of unites this whole narrative in a way. When people say that in a lot of blockbusters, you sort of roll your eyes, you're like, yeah, okay, screenwriter, I get you had to like kind of explain like what you're actually doing all day. It's very pronounced, like you know what's going on because they say it like a lot. I'm sure there's a supercut of all these people going on their monologues about stupid fear, but that's fine. That's what you need. It's a big blockbuster kind of movie. You should have that in there, and Nolan got that. I don't think it would be that apparent later on, but he was in this. And I like that theme because it's something that works for Bruce Wayne. He's afraid of what he did to his parents. You also get into, how he wanted people to fear Batman, but then you also get into the idea of Scarecrow. And even like something that would come out a year before this, The Incredibles, found a way to have your theme connect to your villain. And you got that in The Dark Knight, and you got that in Batman Begins, and you even got that in Dark Knight Rises, even though, that wasn't anyone's favorite. But I think that's why these films are a little more solid, because it plays in more of a traditional narrative way and less in a, this is another superhero movie thing or whatever, and this is the villain in it and stuff, is if you have that theme connecting them, and that theme is connecting to, Batman becoming who he is and everything, I think also connects to the Scarecrow. And to a lesser extent, Ra's al Ghul, but I sort of just like Liam Neeson and him going at each other. Liam Neeson's really great as a bad guy. I sort of wish he hadn't. Well, I guess in real life he's a bad guy. But I think Batman Begins, for me, I think it did do a lot from the superhero genre from what I'm explaining. But I think its big legacy is the career of Christopher Nolan. This established him as a blockbuster director. It let him make The Dark Knight, which let him become the name that he is today. This is the ground zero. Certainly Memento made him to be the Memento guy or whatever, but this kind of gives him the more prominent. I think more people heard about him, started their relationship with him with this than any other movie, and it also established that sign of quality that people would come to expect. I don't know if Christopher Nolan is necessarily my favorite filmmaker as much as with everyone else, and I don't know if this is really like my favorite Batman movie, but every time I've really sat down with it, I always kind of get wrapped up in the story and end up quite liking it. He was basically able to come up with a time where superhero movies could be overly complicated, could be more interested in fanboy stuff, have a lot of things going on and very much feel it, and it'd be hard to like kind of, the other directors could kind of weave it and get it to work, but this felt so kind of streamlined in its pacing and its editing and its direction that you almost like don't feel it. It all feels like a natural, propulsive thing. And to do that with these kind of stories is a pretty amazing thing. It says a lot about a director that this can feel as well paced and well mannered as it is when it has as many things going on as it does, and you can almost forget about various actors in it, like how I didn't mention Gary Oldman as Lieutenant Gordon, and I'm sure half a dozen other people that you'll say you wish I talked about, because he just gets it to work fully as a whole. I think because he gets it to kind of like streamline and kind of like work as a whole and kind of get to the point of the main point of this was establishing Batman and establishing this theme of fear and having the kind of core elements of this film matter so much, but telling it and understanding why you're telling it in such a way made this film such a big, important kind of classic and helped establish one of the bigger name directors of the new century. So if you have seen Batman Begins and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. See you again next time.